Thanks, everyone, for joining us for the January Coffee and Compliance. I'm your host, Jamie Loopold, Director of Channels and Alliances here at PreVeil, also a CMMC certified professional. I'm very excited for this month's conversation. With me is Elaine Nisley and Michael Murray from McKonly and Asbury. McKonly and Asbury, one of the newer authorized C3PAOs and also a PreVeil customer. They'll be sharing their story, some of the best practices that they found going through the assessment process. And of course, we've got a lot of questions that have already been sent in. We'll get to as many as we can in the time allotted. So with that, Elaine, Michael, please do a quick introduction. Tell us a little bit about yourself and McKonly and Asbury. Getting very excited to have you joining me here today. I think you've got a lot of experience that you'll be able to share with our audience that they'll find very valuable.
Yes. Hello, my name's Elaine Nisley. I am a director with McKonly and Asbury, and I've been with the firm for 20 years. I'd led up their internal audit practice for most of those years, and then when CMMC came along, because we do a lot of 853 work and independent assessments in our internal audit practice, I was pulled into the CMMC practice. We started in 2019 and then kind of went on hold. And then last year, we started in earnest, went through getting ready for the assessment, had our DIBCAC assessment the beginning of December, and we're on the list of authorized C3PAOs on January 2nd. Mike?
Hi, I'm Mike Murray. I'm a supervisor with McKonly and Asbury. I've been with the firm for right about 3 years. My background is in Army Human Intelligence, which I did for about 10 years. Did a mid-career shift towards IT, and I am a member of the internal audit practice and also have experience in internal and external IT projects. So it was a natural fit to jump into CMMC, and I'm happy to be here.
Thanks, Michael. Thanks, Elaine. Just a little bit about the actual services that McKonly and Asbury provides. I think it's important for folks to know what they can come to you for, as well as the services that you aren't offering.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we are currently offering CMMC Level 1 and Level 2 mock assessments. There is benefit in having a mock assessment prior to actually going into the certification assessment. And we do not do any consulting at all. We simply do certification assessments. And so we would come in and do a limited set of practices in the SSP reviews, tell you met, not met. And if it's not met, we would tell you why it's not met, but we would not say how to fix it. And then we also have a large practice in service organization controls, SOC 1 and SOC 2. The organization has been doing those for over 20 years. We got into the Health Information Trust Alliance, which is another information security service. And also we do the NIST assessments, NIST 853, NIST CSF, etc. And even though we are a regional practice, we're one of the top 200 regional public accounting firms in the U.S., we mainly keep our practice local with the exception of our cybersecurity practice. So we have national clients throughout the U.S. for that practice.
Wonderful. And as far as the Level 2 actual certification assessments, are you starting those now? Are you kind of pre-registering clients for when you'll start taking those? Could you just tell us a little bit more about when you'll start doing those?
We decided a critical part of the assessment is the interview week. And so all the assessment team members need to be available for those weeks, as well as our clients' personnel. And so what we've done is we've set aside 11 interview weeks between now, starting in July through the end of the year. And of course, neither Mike and I are allowed to go on vacation, and some other people. So we've set those weeks aside and we're starting to fill up. We're in August now, filling up weeks for certification.
Oh, great. Excellent. And if anyone wants to get more information from Elaine and Michael about McKonly and Asbury, we will have contact information for both of them available just a little bit later. So just bear with us there. So I think, one of the things we always like to do is just give you a quick update on CMMC, where things stand. Obviously, a lot has taken place over the last few months, which has been fantastic. But if we look at the current timeline now, I think most everyone knows that CMMC did go into effect in December of 2024. And that meant that the rule went into effect. Does not mean that it's in contracts yet. In fact, it can't be legally in contracts until the CFR 48 rule is in effect. And that'll be sometime in probably late spring, early summer of this year. Still going through rulemaking process. So we don't know exactly when that will take place, but we do know it'll be sometime, certainly sometime this year is the expectation. And at that point, CMMC can start appearing in contracts, and it'll be phased in over, the course of 4 years before everyone is required to be certified. But certainly, we expect that the primes will be pushing this down well before the government does. We're already seeing that with our customers. A lot of our customers are receiving questionnaires. When are you going to be certified? When are you going to have your CMMC level 2 certificate? So we think that that'll come much sooner than, the DoD requirements and contracts for a lot of our customers. Elaine, Michael, anything to add there?
No, I think you're right on. We are seeing customers really getting anxious to get their certifications, even though it's still not really in the contracts.
Absolutely. One point you made, which I think is a really good point and something that I can't stress enough, is the importance of mock assessments, a readiness assessment, gap assessment, whatever you want to call it, is to have somebody qualified check your work before you go and pay a significant amount of money to get your actual CMMC certificate assessment. The reason for that is because the rules have kind of changed. For folks that took advantage of the Joint Surveillance Voluntary Assessment Program, which was, I think, maybe a little over 100 companies were able to participate in that. They had a different set of rules that they had to follow. One of the nice benefits of that program is you had a very liberal use of POAMs. So you could go in, get assessed, have not a great score, have 6 months to then fix everything, get reassessed, and get your certificate. Unfortunately, the rules change with CMMC level 2. And what that means is that in order to even qualify for that 6-month POAM extension, you've got to have a minimum score of 88. And within that 88, there are only a select number of very low value controls that you can actually miss and put on the POAM. So, one thing that I always stress to my customers, our partners, is get your work checked unless you're at a very, very high level of confidence that you're going to be coming close to 110, because I'd hate to see you come in at a 75 or even an 88, but not have the right controls in place, not meeting the right controls. And unfortunately, that means you then have to pay for a full reassessment at some point down the line. So, Elaine, thanks for mentioning that. I think that's really important. And I think that brings us now into kind of the main part of our discussion here is Elaine and Michael, just had the benefit of successfully completing their DIBCAC, their C3PAO authorization assessment, which is the CMMC level 2 assessment. And I think they've got some really valuable insight into that process, some tips and strategies, particularly around the importance of a strong interview, the importance of really strong documentation. So, Elaine, Michael, anything you want to kind of start off with as far as what was your experience like? What do you think really helped to make you successful, especially early on?
Going into it, we as an organization had, I guess you could almost call it an unfair advantage of having a lot of organizational assessment experience. So we did have some people, especially Elaine, who had the experience of how to run a true assessment on ourselves. And kind of tuning that to CMMC from the start really helped us to get off on the right foot. Elaine, I don't know if you want to expand on that bit.
Typically, like most organizations, our organization, they did a good job of putting in place all the security requirements. But a lot of the 320 security requirements are about documenting and saying what you're going to do and then actually doing it. And so, of course, one of the biggest gaps we needed to fill was making sure that we had all of our policies and procedures aligned up and aligned with what was actually happening within our infrastructure and our security environment. And we spent a lot of time on that. And we also spent a lot of time at making sure that our IT staff that were doing the day-to-day management and implementation understood and were familiar with the requirements. Because again, the technical people, they're a key part of the interview process. And if they can't relate the questions for security requirements to what they're actually doing day to day, it can be difficult for them to respond to the questions, even though they may know the answer.
So, Elaine, would you say that DIVCAC would kind of choose who they were going to interview? It wasn't so much that you would put forth who you wanted them to interview. They could kind of interview anybody on the team that they felt would be responsible for meeting certain controls.
No, actually, they said, this is what we want. And if the person who was not available to respond to that question was in the meeting at that time, we'd say, well, we need to have this person involved. And they would set it aside. And when we could get that person pulled into the meeting, then they would go back to that item. So they were very flexible in that way.
And I know you mentioned the importance of really, really good documentation. And I think a lot of people, their focus is their system security plan. That can obviously be a daunting and an overwhelming task to, create one from scratch. And not to throw in a shameless plug, but I believe, Michael, when we were setting this call up, you did use the PreVeil templates for the system security plan to help get you started. Anything more you want to share about, the importance of the system security plan, having a robust system security plan, and how the assessors, kind of viewed that? Any tips and strategies there for the audience?
Sure. Since I did bring that up, it really helped us to not reinvent the wheel. Particularly, we spoke with people on your sides, and they gave us that comfortability that at least the structure of how an SSP is supposed to look, what it should entail. It had some really great examples. Honestly, there isn't an easy way to cheat the inevitability of just you have to go through for all 320 security requirements and articulate how you are meeting them to a very arduous degree. We had the better part of a year to get all of our documentation straight to make sure that what was in the policy templates we had was, again, actually what was happening in our organization. Now, limiting scope, this kind of went to the last conversation point, but limiting scope really helped us. If it wasn't absolutely necessary to have it in our enclave, it made documentation that much easier. Elaine, do you have anything to add to that?
No, initially we started out looking, and the partner in charge of this practice, he wanted to cover the entire organization. And it became clear pretty quickly that a lot of the people in our organization don't even know what CMMC is, and they're not involved in it, and they're not in tune with what you need to do for it. And so when you have that situation, you end up with risk. And so to the extent that we could control the environment and only have people who were familiar with CMMC and involved in CMMC in that environment, or involved in CUI. Because when you get into contractors, the people that understand the CUI and the CUI requirements are the people that should be enclosed in that. You open yourself up to risk if you have a broader environment and you have people who are not trained on what to do with CUI and how to protect it.
That's great. One of the other things I took away from our conversation that I think it's important for people to understand is, the assessment. It's not just a review of technical controls. It really is it's a culture. It's a review of the organization's culture. And I think one of the things that really stood out to me, Elaine, is when you mentioned that, one of the people that they wanted to interview was HR, right? Nobody that they're not implementing the technology, but they have a critical role within the process and the procedures. Just mind sharing just a little bit more about that?
Yes, because again, HR is generally they're required to do the background checks. That's very important because again, your first line of defense is having people who actually adhere to the requirements and don't have any risk with your personnel. And also, of course, our HR department tracked the training and made sure that, all the training was completed prior to authorizing access into the environment, that sort of thing. So they pulled them in. And I think the story I told you is that, and I'll kind of be open here, our IT director gets a ton of emails. And he did not want any more emails. And I told him, you have to sign up for a service like CISA to get the notifications on, what the threats are out there, etc. And so he did. He complied and signed up for a service. And guess what the CAC asked for? They wanted to see emails that he had received for the service that we indicated he was signed up for. And we passed. But it's little things. And actually that is a 5-point control, but it's something that's easy to overlook.
Oh, yeah.
Excellent. Again, I think the takeaways are, make sure that everyone within the organization that might be considered for the interview process understands the role they play, how they're going to approach that interview, be prepared and be available, and make sure that your documentation, is both robust. At some concept covers all of the 320 assessment objectives, and that it meets what you're actually doing. I think the last thing I'll mention before we get into Q&A is I think, one of the things you had mentioned, I don't know if I have this exactly right, but, you said that you did something on a monthly basis and they wanted to see, the last months. And that's important because if you had said we did it on a weekly basis, but you only had the last months to show, that could have caused issues as well in your assessment. I might be getting that slightly wrong, but I know we had a little bit of conversation around that.
That's right. Now, if you do it more often than you say you're going to do it, they'll usually accept that. But if you do it less, no.
Yeah. So don't say you're doing it weekly. If you're doing it monthly, just say you're doing it monthly and show monthly, and you should be good there.
Yeah, even if you do something weekly, it's even safer to say you do it at least monthly if you want to be safe. So
Perfect.
Yeah. Like with a lot of the periodic controls, they're not overly prescriptive on it saying, okay, you have to do this weekly, daily, monthly. But, you do something that's definitely fits the spirit of the control. Just document what you do and be able to show it.
Excellent. Thanks for sharing your story. Or maybe we can put up the contact info now in case anybody wants to get in touch with the McKonly and Asbury team. And we'll start answering some of the questions. We've had a lot of questions that were sent in advance, which is great. And as always, the best question, will receive a $25 gift certificate to your local coffee place of choice. So with that, I'm going to jump into the questions. Elaine and Michael, I think this one is kind of specifically for you. So if one of you wants to take this, that would be great. In a level 2 certification assessment, if McKonly and Asbury determines that a control is not met, can you engage with the party seeking certification to answer questions like, if we were to change X, would you consider that control met? I'd like to know where the line is for consulting. I know you can't do consulting or implementation. Can there be a dialogue about if some changes to policies and procedures would be sufficient to meet the control? I think that's a great question of where does the line blur between consulting versus assessing, and would love your thoughts there.
We need to be very, very careful on how we word. So, I will say what meets. I will say what will not meet. And what you're saying is, under the new rule, the assessor is allowed to do reevaluations throughout the entire process, which is different than the original rule. So, if you present to me, if I say this policy does not meet the requirement, you can go back, rework the policy, present the policy to me. I can assess it again and I can say meet or does not meet. So I would prefer not to do it in a conversational manner, but go back, do what you think you need to do, give it to you. And if I have to look at it 5 times before you get to a met, I'm okay.
Oh, that's right. There are many cases where if it is something smaller, then there can be a back and forth along the lines of what Elaine said. It'd be pretty tough to bomb something so badly that it just can't be fixed within the assessment period.
Fantastic. I appreciate that. I actually wasn't aware of that, so that's really good information.
Under the new rule, you have up to 10 days after the completion of the assessment to have reevaluations done.
Okay, excellent. So we're going to jump into some of the questions that were previously sent in. And this one, there was a whole theme around this, around external service providers. I think this one kind of encapsulated a lot of the questions that came in. Can a company's MSP help answer questions during the interview Or does a dedicated point person need to explain everything? How does a company's MSP fit into the interview section of a company's assessment?
The organization seeking the certification, they can have whoever they want to be included in the interview. So if you want an MSP in there, whoever you want can be a part of the interview.
Great. This one, is it reasonable to expect that whatever C3PAO you work with for your initial assessment may also work for your 3-year assessment? Is there any rule preventing this?
No rules
there's
on
no.
that. Only if
Okay.
the C3PAO would perform consulting services in that 3-year period, then you would be conflicted out. But as long as you don't do any consulting or provide any guidance, you would not.
Got it. That's good to hear. I think that's a little bit different from the classic accounting space where you have like SOX, Sarbanes-Oxley, where you do have to. I used to work with PwC and Deloitte way back in the day, and they would have to shuffle their clients around. So I'm glad that the DoD did not make that happen.
No, we don't have that 5-year role like the big
That's
four.
right. Yeah. What level of technical expertise is their interviewee expected to have? When discussing things in the SSP, and I don't think you don't really require technical expertise, right? It's more, can you talk to the specific controls that you're responsible for?
You may be required, if you say I'm in a DMZ and I'm behind this firewall, you may need to have someone in the interview. You might need to bring them in special, but someone that has access to those firewall rules can pull them up on the screen, show them, and explain these are the settings that I have, and this is the reason you're in a DMZ and you're secure.
Got it. And I think that actually answers a second question we have is, would you expect to have a single point person to answer all the questions, or is it better to have SMEs that can talk about the various domains that they oversee? I think your answer is the latter there.
Yeah. We will follow the same process as DIBCAC did, and they actually followed through the SSP. So for each of the interview days, you will know we're going to be covering security requirements from here to here. And so that portion of the SSP will be walking through. So you'll have a pretty good idea of the kinds of people that need to be involved in the interview.
Great. So next question that came in is, are there any options for smaller companies to self-certify with the final rule? My understanding is it's not the size of the organization, but rather the contractual requirements combined with whatever gets flowed down, from your prime, that really dictates whether or not you'll need a certification or can self-certify. Is that correct?
Yeah, the contract
correct.
language is going to say because there will be some self-certified level 2s, but that is dependent upon the contract.
Got it. If memory serves me correct, it's going to be a small, very small percentage is the expectation of those that will be able to self-certify on a long-term basis outside of maybe the first year. Wasn't it something around like 5% was the estimate at level 2?
I saw that number floating around. Yeah.
Okay.
300 to 500 or something like that. It's a small number for the first year. Yeah.
Okay. Here's a great question for your team. Is there an ability to use PreVeil in a VDI solution, as VDI solves many problems? Is exactly how the question was worded.
Yes, that is exactly what we did. Yeah, we did implement PreVeil into our VDI environment. It's the short answer. I don't think we have time to answer exactly how we did that, but yeah, that is our current setup.
And the benefit is all of our laptops are out of scope.
Yeah, exactly. We appreciate that the DoD did finally clarify that in the final rule. That was an ongoing debate in many compliance forums for many years. So I was very appreciative of that. That ties in nicely to the next question. Does the cloud lock feature implemented by PreVeil help with reducing the requirements for endpoints? For those that don't know what cloud lock is, quite simply, it disallows the ability to locally sync files from PreVeil down to your local endpoint. And this isn't a PreVeil specific question, I don't think. If you have other cloud services that store, process, transmit CUI, it's important to note that by simply by viewing that document, you are now processing that CUI. And again, unless we go back to what we talked about just a minute ago with a VDI, that's the only carve out that the DoD currently has allowed for removing the endpoint entirely from scope. I think there might be some small differences if you're not syncing locally. Do I need BitLocker or do I need some sort of full disk encryption if nothing is synced to my hard drive? Probably not. But outside of that, I don't think there's a lot of additional controls that you won't need to meet at the endpoint level just because you're not syncing locally. Because again, when you open something, when you're viewing it, when you access it, that is part of the definition of process that the DoD has determined under CMMC level 2. Michael, Elaine, did I miss anything there?
No, the only thing I would say is it's always good practice to have encryption on your laptop regardless. But
Sure.
yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Another question about FedRAMP, one of our favorite topics. Question about, first of all, one question came up about PreVeil is not FedRAMP. We're just not in the FedRAMP marketplace because we don't sell directly to any federal agencies. FedRAMP is supposedly going to be changing that requirement in the future where you can get in the marketplace without selling. Once they do, we'll be one of the first ones in there. But in the interim, we are FedRAMP moderate equivalent, continue to be. We were just reaffirmed as FedRAMP moderate equivalent back in November, the very current body of evidence. So any questions about that, we're more than happy to answer. But then a second question, came up about do security protection assets that don't store, process, transmit CUI that simply protect the CUI, do they need to be FedRAMP? I believe the answer is no. With the final rules,
They just need to meet the security requirements for the component they're associated with.
Right, perfect. Thank you. That's what I thought. It's great to get that cleared up. And a question came up about what's the CCP's role now with the final rule. Elaine, is that something you can expand upon? Because I think you guys are looking to use CCPs.
Yeah, I can tell you how we're going to use the CCP. In the final rule, all of the met, not met decisions need to be reviewed and the final determination comes from a CCA. But there's a lot of work, in my opinion, that needs to be done to prepare to have that final item to review. And our take is we're bringing up CCPs. We're going to get them involved in the assessments and we're going to get them trained so that we can then build CCAs, because you need to have, I guess, like 5 years of experience to get into the CCA. Well, how do you get the experience if you aren't able to work on assessments as a CCP? So again, we're going to look on them as valuable members of the team and a good way of building our benching and increasing the capabilities of our staff.
Great. I think that's a great way to leverage the CCPs. Next up, what is the one question, or I guess really the one domain that most organizations have a hard time with?
I'm not sure about most organizations, but for us, category 1 was probably the most difficult. It is the most technical. It has access control, identification, authorization. Those things are really tough to get to work together. Even for an operation like ours where the scope is limited, it was still probably the most difficult.
Right. And could you just expand about what made it so challenging? Is it just the sheer depth of the control?
In a lot of cases for us, I'll take encryption, for example. Implementing NIST validated encryption was something of a back and forth, and just due to the fact that it did kind of slow things down and it did require some testing on our end to actually get implemented. And we have to be able to be sure that the people implementing it, in our case, the IT team, can adequately discuss that with us and explain to us exactly how these technical controls have been implemented so that we can then, update our SSP and procedure documentation. It's really tough. It's the place where you don't want to miss carrying the one.
Got it. Thank you. This one I can handle as a prospective C3PAO who is using PreVeil. Will we be able to reach out to PreVeil resources if we're presented a technical question during the assessment that we may not fully understand? Yeah, absolutely. We've got a dedicated compliance team. I'm part of that. We have our compliance officer, and more than happy. We've worked with actually now McKonly and Asbury was our second. We just today found out another C3PAO using PreVeil has passed their DIBCAC assessment. They won't be in the marketplace for a bit because they've still got a lot of hoops to jump through. But yeah, we're absolutely available for that. We've got a dedicated compliance team to support not just potential C3PAOs, but all of our customers. So that's an easy yes. The next one, other than PreVeil, is it necessary to use GCC High email to meet compliance requirements? I've been told this is necessary for emails in transit. I think this one's obviously a no. There's no hard requirement to use any one particular technology solution. Got to meet the various controls from DFAR 7012 to ITAR to CMMC level 2, but there's nothing that requires you to use a particular technology. Elaine, Michael, and anything else to add there? I think that one's pretty straightforward.
No, I think that's good.
No.
Great. Just a couple left here. How specific should we expect policies to be in regards to specific practices or assessment objectives? Is it better to have policies written for each domain, or is it acceptable to have an all-encompassing IT policy that covers the same procedures? I think what they're getting here is, how deep does my SSP and the supporting policies and procedures need to be? I believe you did say early on in our discussion today that you do have to cover all 320 assessment objectives, but please elaborate there.
Well, and I can just give you one example. I mean, we used the SSP and we followed the format set out by PreVeil. And that was for each one of the security requirements, you identified how you met that security requirement, and we referenced the security requirement. There was one case where we forgot to say that it was the security requirement A within that practice. And it was pointed out to us by DIBCAT that we should have had the A there. So again, they were looking for a reference within the SSP to every one of those security requirements.
Great. And label them, apparently.
Yes.
Yes. I think we'll finish with this one. The SSP seems like the most difficult task. Any advice on how to start creating SSPs for individual companies, and any advice on how to feel not so overwhelmed?
Well, again, we mentioned early on that we did use a template. So even if at the end of the day, you're not going to stick with that template, it's good to see how it should be structured. And in our case, we broke the SSP up into the 4 categories. And we just, like with any project, instead of trying to bite the whole thing off at once, we looked at them as individual categories and kind of got off to a start in that direction.
Great. And I think, again, the use of templates is really, as you mentioned, was something that makes life a lot easier versus trying to reinvent the wheel from scratch, correct?
Oh.
Yes.
Excellent. And the last one here that I'll take, will PreVeil have a pre-assessment guide sometime in the future for PreVeil users? I assume this question was, is there a self-assessment guide or something to that? And we already have that. So we have our PreVeil Compliance Accelerator. And if you're signed up for that, you already have access to self-assessment guides and a whole host of other resources. So whoever sent that in, maybe just talk to us about the Compliance Accelerator if you don't have access to that. So we've got just a couple questions that are just being sent in live. I think we've got a few more minutes here. So we have, how long do we have to wait for a C3PAO assessment if we will apply on February 3rd, 2025? I don't know if they're referring to applying to DIBCAC or to the Cyber AB to become a C3PAO, or if they're just looking for the CMMC assessment. I think in either case, it depends on how long the queue is. If you're looking to get an individual assessment, you can just reach out to a number of C3PAOs. But if you're actually trying to become a C3PAO, I think there's a fairly significant backlog, but I don't know the latest on that.
Well, no, we got ours at the beginning of December and we waited months. We put our application in July and they got us, I think it was the second week of December that week last year. So I'm thinking it's getting worse, but.
Here's one on separation of duties. We're a small company with 5 staff. I handle HR and the IT. No one else can. How would you suggest somebody approach separation of duties there?
Typically, when I don't like to consult, but I will. But I'm talking to my clients about segregation of duties in small shops, and I've dealt with this quite a bit. To me, quite often, it's not possible to say that you can take somebody and pull them aside and they won't have any access to do anything. So what's important is that you have a control in place, that you always have a double review. So you're always having somebody look to make sure that you're not doing anything for your own access and just double checking the access. So the best thing is to have that second review.
Great. I think that makes sense. We're an MSP. Do we need to be CMMC certified to work with customers? It says using PreVeil, but I don't think that part's all that important. I think it's really just if we're an MSP, do we need to be CMMC certified? Believe the final rule kind of said that you do not need to be CMMC certified as an MSP, but you will be part of the assessment boundary, of course. You may be part of the interview. And I think there is some benefit to an MSP getting CMMC certified.
Well, I could speak to that. I mean, we work with a lot of MSPs because of our SOC 2 practice. And what we're finding is, they're getting CMMC level 2 certification assessments and then doing a customer relationship or responsibility matrix for their clients so that their clients can then inherit the controls that they have responsibility for. Because a CMMC level 2 certification assessment, the assessor can accept those inherited controls without doing that additional testing.
Great. Thank you for that. Let's see. Does PreVeil have plans to pursue FedRAMP authorization? Yeah, I kind of already covered this. We do when there's no requirement for a sponsor, because again, today we don't sell to a government agency, which is a requirement for FedRAMP authorization. They have indicated that that will not be a requirement at some point in the future. As FedRAMP moderate equivalent, we have to have 0 POAMs to achieve that FedRAMP moderate equivalency. We think that we would be able to get authorized very, very quickly once we don't have the requirement of a government sponsor. But until that time comes, there's nothing, unfortunately, we can do there. How to identify CUI, FCI if it is not labeled yet? I think we'll end with that question because that's one of the questions that we get often. I always tell people, when in doubt, talk to your contracting officer, talk to your prime. Michael, Elaine, I don't know if you have any other thoughts there.
Yeah, I mean, and what is considered CUI should also be outlined within the contract. And if it's not clear, then like you said, talk to the contracting officer.
Yep, precisely.
Great. Okay. Well, yeah, thanks for everyone attending. Before we go, we do need to pick the best question. Michael, Elaine, I don't know if you have one off the top of your head that you answered that kind of stuck with you. We did have quite a few.
Well, I can tell you my favorite was the question about MSPs, because that has come up a lot in discussion, both just in the space in general, but also at the Cyber AB town hall events, those slugfests. It has gotten pretty heated at times, but it applies to so many people. It is a really important question to have an answer for.
Great. And was that the one about MSPs helping to answer questions, or is that the ones about MSPs? Do they need to be CMMC certified themselves?
I was referring to the answering questions who had present during that interview process.
Perfect. Well, thanks, Michael. That makes my job just a little bit easier. So again, Orly, maybe just put the contact info up one more time in case anybody wants to reach out. So again, thanks everyone for attending this month. Really appreciate everyone joining. With that said, Michael, Elaine, any final last words? Again, really thank you for attending.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for inviting us, and we continue to enjoy working with you. So
excellent. All right. Thanks, everyone.